So today's video was gonna be about why we should tap to arm bars, but I think that's pretty obvious. So instead, let's talk about what happens if you don't tap to arm bars. Let's jump in. As you can see, I'm in a sling. I did have surgery recently because of a bone spur that broke off inside my elbow joint. And I'm gonna let you guess is how that happened. Not tapping to arm bars. As I sit here in my arm sling post-surgery, I think back as to what I could have done differently to avoid this. And as a young, impressionable white belt who wanted to do all the cool things like fight through arm bars, let my arm get hyperextended because that's how tough I am, I can handle it. I sit here thinking to myself, how can I use this experience to put value on the table? And I think it's important to remind everyone watching this, especially the white belts, just because your arm doesn't break in an arm bar doesn't mean you aren't damaging the elbow joint. Technically, this is a two-part injury. I failed at escaping arm bars for so long and so frequently that the bones inside my elbow joint started to develop osteophytes, or bone spurs, which are bony projections or spikes that your bones build up to help protect an area that's consistently or constantly damaged. Now, the act in developing bone spurs might not be all that painful when compared to a bone break, but you have to remember that these bone spurs can destroy your range of motion. I lost 50 degrees of range of motion in my arm before I had surgery. 20 from flexion and 30 in extension, meaning I couldn't lock my arm out all the way or bring my hand all the way to my face due to these bone spurs getting in the way. Now, some of you may already be dealing with this and may also be thriving with bone spurs. That's totally possible, and that was the case for me for a very long time until one of them broke off. Surgery wasn't even an idea in my mind until this happened, and that's because this bone spur broke off in my elbow, and while it laid flat, it was fine, but if it turned up on its side, it felt like there was an arrowhead jammed into my elbow joint, causing searing pain and even more lack of range of motion. In fact, when this bone spur flipped up on its side, my arm was stuck in a 90-degree angle, causing extreme pain. I couldn't unlock it. And in fact, when this bone spur flipped up on its side, normally from activity, it would lock my arm into a 90-degree position, sometimes for up to an hour. And once I knew that I was gonna have surgery, I promised you guys I'd do a video on it, so here we are. Obviously, this is not one of my most proudest moments. I'd like to think that now, being a 3-star purple belt, I have the common sense to tap when things hurt. I have the common sense to tap when I know that I don't have an escape, and I have the common sense to know to not push my body beyond its own limits. But for those of us who are new to Jiu Jitsu and are almost intoxicated by the idea of pushing through injuries and fighting forward and always digging deep, we tend to push ourselves a little harder than we should. My goal with this video is to show you what's going on with me to hopefully help you learn and move forward without this happening to you. I plan on making this a 2 to maybe 3-part series just so you can get a good understanding of what the recovery looks like, and hopefully you can learn to not make some of the mistakes that I have. So the surgery I received was called osteophytectomy, where they put me under general anesthesia. They go in and grind the bone spurs off. And you have to remember, I also had a broken bone spur floating around inside the joint, which was removed via arthroscopy. Basically, they go in with a scope through a porthole in my arm and remove the bone chip that way. You're probably asking yourself, well, what does recovery look like? How much time am I gonna have to sit out for this if this happens to me? For me personally, it's gonna be about a month that I'm out for. Now, the doctor talked about possibly 1.5 to 2 months before I can go back to Jiu Jitsu. I'm pushing for a month. If healing and recovery goes well, we can make it happen, but we won't know until we get closer to that deadline. Every day I wear my sling. Right now I'm wearing a compression stocking around my arm. So far I am happy to say that physical therapy is to be started relatively quickly. I had my first PT session within 2 days of surgery, and this is just because they've told me the elbow has a tendency to lock up or even tighten up beyond what it was before the surgery if we don't employ movement right away. So at my first PT session, I was given very minor and easy exercises to do for mobility. And along with that, my therapist also made me this arm brace that I'm supposed to wear at nighttime so that I don't hit my arm on anything, I don't open up any of the incisions, and I don't stretch beyond what I'm supposed to at this point. I was actually pretty impressed because she heated up this piece of plastic right in front of me in this hot water bin and then cut it to size, formed it around my arm, and then as it dried off, it hardened into place. She was able to put Velcro straps on it, and now it's this piece of armor that I literally wear when I go to sleep at night that prevents me from hurting myself. And I'm supposed to do this at least for the first 2 weeks after surgery, possibly up to 3 weeks if I feel that I need it. And once my arm heals up a little bit more, I will be filming the second part of this, and I'll show you guys the incision points on my elbow. There's 4 of them, all of which are extremely sore at this point, and it is a process taking the compression stocking off because it does cause a lot of pain. So expect to see that in the next installment of this series. So in this recovery phase, for the first 2 weeks, I'm going to be doing PT-based movements that are very easy. They aren't going to be physically challenging as far as strength goes, but they will be challenging for range of motion, which is really important during this healing process because this is the whole reason I got the surgery, to help improve range of motion, also to alleviate the pain from the broken bone spur. Once we're past that point, around the 3-week mark, I can start doing exercise band exercises very lightly to help incorporate some of that muscle stimulation that I not only crave, but my arm will need to help further the healing process. And then once we get closer to that month and a half, I can start returning to the gym. Again, light re-entry. I'm not going back trying to hit PRs right away. This is something I need to be very aware and careful with, as the healing process is dependent on that. And then with the doctor's approval, around the 1.5 to 2 month mark, I will be returning to Jiu Jitsu. So I plan on documenting this process all the way up until that point. I want you guys to see exactly what I'm going through with this. Hopefully to help you guys avoid this kind of an injury, because it is totally avoidable. I personally feel that it was ego driven. It also came from a place of ignorance because I just didn't know better as a white belt fighting through these things. I think that finding the right time to tap is somewhat of an art, because there's so much value in knowing your limitations. And how do you know your limitations if you don't press your limitations? But there's also a point where common sense has to come into play. If you're constantly hurting yourself to avoid tapping, that's an ego-driven move. That's not going to do you any good, and you're probably going to run into injuries like this that are going to put you on your butt for a month or 2 or 3 so you can recover. I actually did an entire video on this concept. I'll link it up here so you can check it out. If you're someone who allows yourself to get hurt to avoid tapping, you're going to want to watch this. I think the biggest takeaway that we can learn here is that just because you're not breaking bones doesn't mean you're not injuring yourself. Pain is a really good indicator that you're doing something wrong. Don't let yourself get hurt. Don't let yourself experience pain if you don't have to. Jiu-Jitsu can be something that you can experience and train for a very large and long portion of your life if you do it correctly. Longevity is definitely one of the goals I have for my Jiu-Jitsu journey. I want to be able to do this well into my later years of life. But how am I going to do that if I don't listen to what my body's telling me? How am I going to do that if I let myself get injured to avoid tapping? The answer is you don't. Probably end up stopping before you get to black belt. You end up having many regrets, and you probably often think about what would have happened if you would have played it a little bit more smart. Getting to the point where I was letting my arm be hyperextended to avoid tapping did very little for my jiu-jitsu journey, especially now because I have to take 2 months off to recover. And while that seems like a common sense kind of thing, it's really easy to get caught up in the moment, especially as a white belt who's aspiring for great things, especially as a white belt who doesn't know any better, and especially as a white belt who's very driven, and maybe as a white belt who comes from a wrestling background who's been taught to push through pain no matter what. I'm fully aware that this injury doesn't make me look cool, it doesn't make me look tough, and the whole point of this channel is to help our community grow together. So if I can do that by talking about my injuries, I definitely want to expose myself in that way. I'm always going to come at you guys with transparency in mind first. Okay, so obviously don't look real cool right now with this injury, but if it helps other people avoid that, I'm 100% about it. So to you white belts, and maybe even some of you blue belts out there who've been letting your arms get hyperextended, you've been letting your ankles get popped in toe holds, you've been letting your knees get extended a little bit too far in knee bars, I'd highly recommend you stop doing that. It's not worth the injury that comes later on down the road that's going to put you on your butt for a month, or 2 or 3, so that you can recover from surgery. You can still learn and find the value in jiu-jitsu without hurting yourself. It's all about playing it smart, using good common sense, and not letting your pride or your ego take control. So as I recover, I'm going to keep you guys up to date on what's going on, what my physical therapy exercises look like, what my rubber band exercises look like once I get to that point, and then obviously once I'm able to make a return to the weight room and jiu-jitsu, what that looks like. It's going to be a process. I'm fully aware that I have to be slow with this and I have to be careful. This is not my first time coming back from a surgery. I just want to put as much value on the table as possible with this, because I truly don't want other people to have to go through this if you don't have to. And really, no one should have to go through that. this. And that's the video, guys. I hope you got something out of it. We do have more jiu-jitsu, fitness, and athlete recipes on the way. So if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit that button. I'd love to have you along for the ride. Also, you guys that have experience with bouncing back from injuries, whether it be from surgery or injuries where you never had surgery, drop your experiences in the comment. Not only can I benefit from that, but the people reading the comments can benefit from that. That's what this community is all about, helping each other grow. And I always appreciate you guys that drop your experiences in the comments. So thank you for that, guys. And in the meantime, you know how we like to end them. Eat plants, train hard, and feel good. I'll see you in the next one. I don't know how to say that.
Osteophytectomy. Osteophytectomy. Osteophytectomy.
Guys, don't get hurt, all right? None of this is worth it. None of this is worth it, all right? Osteophytectomy.